Hey guys, this is Steven and Robert with Team Covenant, and we are here with one of our favorites, Damon Stone from Fantasy Flight. Always a great interview, at least since last year. We really loved the interview, and it seemed to generate a lot of questions and some answers, but also answers that followed with questions. So,
as they do.
The first thing I'd like to just go ahead and anyone who doesn't know you, where are you now in the design space of X, Y, and Z game? What do you, like your Fantasy Flight role, what is that exactly?
What do I do for Fantasy Flight?
What do you do? What games are you involved in?
What games am I involved in? Call of Cthulhu, Android Netrunner, a Game of Thrones. I'm getting ready to hand over almost all the reins for Call of Cthulhu to Brad Andrews. Really square away, locked away player, really good guy, really good designer.
Nice. That's
really
important.
good at dotting his I's and crossing his T's. Dotting his T's and crossing his I's.
What about the lowercase J's?
I don't know about that. I'm not so sure about that. I do not do a whole lot of cards with J's in them. I kind of have a J phobia. I avoid them as much as possible. I fear the J.
So you're going to be full-time Netrunner Thrones?
That is what it currently looks like.
Okay.
But, I mean, it's Fantasy Flight games. So at any given time, they can decide, you know what, let's change this way and change that way. My boss, Michael Hurley, is the Vice President of Product Development. He's very hands-on in for the LCG. Like, pretty much every other team and department has like a manager, but we respond directly to him. He's just really invested in this product category, this line. He plays all of them heavily. He's very good, which is always really fun when your boss actually takes an active interest in what you do, but trusts you enough not to try and micromanage. Like, he's very clear about I am here as a play tester, not as your boss and vice president of the company.
Nice.
And he's very clear about when he's saying something in that role versus when he's saying something from his official company role.
Nice.
So it's really nice to have, I mean, you guys know, to have a boss who supports you and trusts you. It's always really great.
Oh, I know nothing about that.
So, he'll make small changes in where our emphasis at any given time to help us keep things fresh and to keep different ideas. So we frequently get together for design meetings where the entire team will come in and do some very sort of like basic sketch, top level design, or the entire team will get together for a last go through right before the very last opportunity for playtesters to have their say in stuff.
Nice.
So there's a bit of flux, a little bit of give and pull, but not in a things are constantly changing sort of way, but in a things are always being kept fresh, and we're always constantly feeling invested in what the entire team is doing.
Nice.
But for probably the next year, my focus is going to be primarily those two games. My last set that I'm going to do is going to be some very top-level design with Brad for Call of Cthulhu, and then that's going to be his baby. I'll still deal with the rules and stuff like that. The design and development is going to be all Brad.
Nice. All right. So
I couldn't leave it in a better designer's hands, so I'm really happy about that.
Well, let's start out then with Netrunner.
Okay.
Because we talked to you extensively about Thrones last year. Still want to definitely talk to you about Thrones this year. But Netrunner, so this is kind of unprecedented, I guess, for Fantasy Flight. You have 240 people playing in a tournament tomorrow.
Yes, we do.
And so what does that do to the entire kind of like the perception, if you will, of Netrunner? Like at Fantasy Flight, is it like, oh my gosh, this thing is huge? Or is it, we've created this great, how do you feel about that?
I can tell you how I feel about it. I can't tell you how the company feels about it.
Okay, well, how do you feel about it?
I mean, because obviously the company is made of lots of different people. Obviously, as a company, the company Alliance, we're very excited by the reception of Android Netrunner by the gaming community. But every one of us as individuals has their own opinion. Me personally, I'm completely excited. I'm blown away by it.
Yeah.
When I interviewed for this design position to begin with, I was asked by Michael, my boss, so tell me what, some of your favorite games have been. And the two card games that I named as my top favorites were Game of Thrones and Netrunner.
Wow.
And so this was like 3 years ago now, 3.5 years ago, something like that. And he's like, it's funny you should say that.
Wow.
Because we just got the rights to Netrunner, and
That's awesome.
we're going to be producing it. And like, I don't remember what the exact time frame was that he gave to it, but it's something that had been in the works at that point. And I was like,
Dream come true.
I would love to work on that, if at all possible.
Yeah.
And so, eventually I did. We got it set up and out the door, and it was a huge reception, and I could not be happier.
I mean, I don't think the port, if you will, could have gone any better. Because it's like all the cards that were potentially problematic were more or less fixed. Like, even just old Crypsis to new Crypsis is different. And then you introduce the identities, you introduce the factions. Without taking away from Netrunner, you give like this huge amount of like, just, I don't know, it's inspiration. It's like
I'm going to say thank you
innovation
on
is what
behalf
it is.
of Lucas.
Yeah.
When I was hired, I did a sort of like a write-up, we call like a vision document of what I thought we could do with Netrunner, where I thought it should go. And Lucas did a lot of that stuff, but Lucas did that on his own. He looked at it and he saw the same sorts of stuff, same opportunities. But Richard Garfield's original design for the game, the core rule set, beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's elegant.
So good.
It's fantastic. And so we're standing on the shoulders of a giant there.
Yeah.
Everything that we have managed to accomplish is, it owes itself to the work that he put in with that original design. And then Lucas's porting of it was inspired. I mean, I
that was the word I was
another
looking
word
for.
for it. It's just inspired. So, being a part of it and the development during the core set and the design from, Genesis on has been really
Nice.
right place, right time sort of thing. I had a lot of people before me who
It's
did
a
some
miracle.
amazing work. It's a miracle.
I want to dive in to Netrunner
Please.
since we've got you here, and I want to just say 2 card names.
Okay.
Those 2 are Account Siphon and Scorched Earth.
Yes.
So a lot of players at this point would say, on the runner's end, Account Siphon, since the same old thing has come in, is mind-blowingly good. Just like, well, it's like, we're worried because now we can get Siphon 6-7 times a game, and the runner's on top of us the whole time. On the other end, the corps are saying, man, Scorched Earth is where it's at. Seasource Scorched Earth, or the Wayland identity, score it, Scorched Earth, Project Atlas into Scorched Earth are your components. And it's the kind of rumors and rumblings that we, having been in LCGs, is the kind of thing where it's like, ooh, those cards should be restricted or something. So that leads me to a few things. First of all, do you see those cards as problematic, as blinking red lights, as there may be a thing here? Second, do you have solutions planned for cards like that in the future? Or are you going to be perfect in the design the entire time?
There is no such thing as perfect in the design. God, I wish there were, but there is no such thing. Usually what seems or appears to other people to be perfect in design is a case of, like last time we talked about seeding cards.
Yeah.
Here's a problem. I want you guys to find the card that can cause some major shifts in the game. We already have a solution planned for it. We're just not going to give it to you for a year or two because it's going to take a certain amount of time to recognize that there is a card or 3 cards or 6 cards that are seriously strong. And part of that is like, wow, I just found this, amazing thing. Wow, I also found this amazing thing. It's like, and then watching as the meta grows and shifts to accommodate that, and the solution presents itself, designed along with the problem that it's a solution to. When you see something that looks like perfect design, that's usually what the case is. Sometimes there's cards that are solutions to a problem that does not exist. Hello, Net Shield.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, Net Shield. Probably the card that got panned almost the most in the core set. Almost the most. And I can't tell you how many times I heard someone say, this card is useless. I will never play with this card. And now I hear people going, anybody in a Jinteki heavy meta is like, I refuse to build any decks that don't have at least 2.
Yeah.
And Why? It's like, well, it only does one. Yeah, it only does one, but that one is the only thing that keeps you alive.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so when you need it, you really need it, and it's the only answer to net damage. So it's a great card to a problem that you didn't know that was even going to be a problem.
Sure. Yeah.
Will it always be the solution? Probably not.
Yeah.
Will there be another answer that works better depending on what kind of deck you have? Almost certainly at some point.
Yeah.
So again, no such thing as perfect design. It's just sometimes we think ahead of you. But we can do that because we cheat, because we're making the
can see
cards
everything.
and we know when things are going to be released.
Yeah.
As far as, do I recognize those as strong cards? Yes. Blinking red lights? No. Yellow lights?
Maybe.
Yes. Well, anytime the players identify a set of cards as being problematic, something can happen there. And we're going to talk about how that happened in a Game of Thrones in a bit. But the player base recognizing that these cards are problematic can cause ripples. The question is how those ripples resolve. If the ripples are, oh my God, Scorched Earth is kicking my butt up, the street and down the street, it's time for me for some mesh bodysuits and plastic, carapace and stuff, then boom, you've solved your own problem.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with a meta that is Scorched Earth centric, that's your solution, and you're done. Those decks are no longer a threat to you. That person now has to get a 3-card, 4-card combo to kill you. They are much better off, and it's much more efficient for them just to win with 7 cards than trying to flatline you. And if their deck is not capable of doing that, it's a poorly designed deck.
Sure.
Or at least it's a deck that was really, really well designed to flatline that has yet to be modified for the change in the metagame.
Yeah.
Right? Because, that's what metagame
The
means.
evolution between.
Exactly. So the other side of it is everybody decides that these cards are huge and powerful and overpowered, and so everybody starts playing it because it's easier to play the power cards than to play against the power cards.
Yeah.
Except for those people who refuse to play against the power cards, who are going to rightfully get owned by the power cards. Improvise, adapt, overcome. This was the motto that I learned, when I was a Marine. Those were the 3 things you had to do, and if you couldn't, you're a dinosaur. You're going to lose. Improvise, adapt, overcome.
Right.
It's just, how do you improvise? How do you adapt? How do you overcome? If you can't beat them, join them. That is how a lot of people solve it.
It's true.
Hey, there is this great big, combo that I can't beat, so I'm going to build that same thing, and then now it's a race between which of us can get it off first.
Yep.
That's not healthy for the metagame.
Yeah.
And when that becomes a problem, then we have to step in and we have to do something. If we did not foresee that being the way that the meta was going to respond to it, restriction, errata, or banning is the way that we handle it. We can't wait for a year and a half, depending on where we are in our development cycle, for the answer to come down the line. There might already be answers, but we can't just let 6 months to a year of gaming be completely skewed because everybody's gravitating to the center.
Now, is that to say that potentially in the future, when the answer does eventually come out, you reconsider the ban, the errata, and all that kind of stuff, and say,
Potentially.
okay,
Potentially.
nice.
I do not like having to errata a card multiple times.
Right.
Sometimes it's a requirement. The errata solved one problem, but sometimes it would create a different one that is
Right.
unrelated to the problem that the card
Yeah, the
was.
original.
It's just suddenly like the way that it works with the rules is slightly different, and so it creates other card conflicts. We hate when that happens. We really try to avoid it, but we're human. Our editors are human. Our playtesters are human. These mistakes happen. I mean, we're dealing with thousands of cards and tens of thousands of players. They're going to find the mistakes and they're going to break them, and then it's our job to figure the most efficient and ideally elegant way of fixing it when it happens.
Now, all that said, is there figuratively a checklist at all that sends up red flags in terms of this card is a problem for these reasons, like it's ubiquitous within the meta, or it's overpowered within the meta, or any other kind of reasons like that?
We have a number of criteria for a card to get put onto our watch list.
Okay.
And a number of criteria that's smaller than that about when a card needs to be handled.
Okay.
as far as to whether it's going to get errata, banned, or restricted is based entirely on how we think the meta would respond to those, to that change.
Okay.
Like sometimes banning a card is just the best way to make everybody leave it alone and move in a different direction.
Sure.
And other times restricting it is going to force people to make some difficult choices. Because the problem isn't really with the card level, the problem is with its ubiquity. You know, the utilitarian nature of the card makes everybody want to put it in the maximum amount of times, and then that just starts making everybody's deck look and feel and play the same. In some cases, it's just purely conceptual. The idea of this card, everybody gets taken with it and starts using it. And even though everybody's deck that's using it is completely different, you keep seeing that same card and it creates this sort of like static feedback. It's like, oh, that card again. Oh, that card again. I see that card in every Martell deck.
Yeah.
It's, it's the Water Gardens. Of course you do. It's a 0 gold, +1 gold limited card. You're gonna see it.
Right.
But that's not a problem.
Right.
With this card over here, that is, a 3/3, Bicon with a crest that does this utilitarian effect. If something gets seen everywhere just as frequently, that's more of a problem. And the reason why is because locations don't hurt you if all it's doing is presenting gold.
Right.
This card is going to make you lose the game, and so it's going to be a tool by which you are losing the game, and so your wrath gets directed towards that.
It's the confluence of all those
The
things.
wrath. It's all about the wrath. Well,
So that's where we start coming into this sort of thing.
Cool.
So this is a really fascinating thing. It's a fascinating time for Netrunner because you have the biggest tournament ever, 240 people. You have all these different metas that have just gotten a giant box of cards,
Yeah.
and nobody really knows truly what to do with them. We've been, everyone's probably been playing hundreds of games maybe since this box have come out.
I hope so.
And it's like, you have a local meta, and it's like, if Robert's running Scorched Earth in my local meta, and I can be like, I'll put in the Plasticates and deal with it. So what happens whenever you have all these different metas regionally, perceiving cards differently, playing cards differently, having that ubiquitous nature to some cards that other metas don't have at all. All of them get put into this giant puddle and thrown at each other, and one of them is a winner. Is this like a giant laboratory for you guys to actually see what is being done? Is there anything that you're worried about seeing? Like that it's like, man, if they figured this out, this is going to be the most broken tournament
I haven't
ever.
told anyone about this.
It's like,
So-
Figured it out.
That's 3 questions there. The first one is, what happens? My answer is beautiful, beautiful chaos. I love it. The second one is it a great big laboratory? The answer is yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
There is no true meta. There is no national or international meta game. As much as people like to say there isn't for Netrunner. The game is too new. We had one, medium-sized tournament at Worlds last year, and one medium-sized tournament as the Icebreaker tournament last year here at GenCon a year ago when we introduced the game. The game was way too new for anybody to really understand how to play the factions, let alone be able to develop a true metagame and how to then make adjustments in your deck based on what you thought other people were going to be playing from, San Diego to Maine. So there is finally going to exist a true metagame. And I know a lot of people have been playing in various methods online, but that's hardly the same thing, right? You play a bunch of people because one of the things you want to do is you want to test out your deck. So you create these wild ideas. You do decks that are intended purely to be proof of concept. It's not about the winning. It's about, can this actually work at all? And if it can, now I'm going to spend a bunch of time trying to tweak it to make it work. I don't want to spend 100 hours trying to tweak the perfect deck only to realize that the 3-card combo I had gets solved by any time I face anybody that's playing House Bioroid or Wayland.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, boom. That's not a thing.
50-50.
I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose against half the houses half the factions I play against.
Yeah.
That's no good.
Yeah.
So this is going to be the first time. So we're going to get a chance to see a lot of what people have been talking about and see if what they've been concerned about actually comes up. versus the stuff that we've seen, that we've been playing with our playtesting for the last almost 2 years now. So, are there cards that we think that the players are completely undervalued or even dismissed that are actually cards that we're like, this should be interesting if anybody has managed to figure this out yet? Yes, there's at least one card that I know that gets routinely planned that is, to me, a card that is super strong. And if somebody can manage to make it work in the right deck, I think we'll completely warp the meta between now and Worlds.
Nice.
Will they discover it? I don't know. Is it broken? Not by any stretch of the imagination. The card is perfectly balanced.
It's talking about stronger together, right?
But it is something that is definitely not being considered and generally being dismissed by most people that I've heard.
Yeah.
I don't get a chance. I wish I could, but I don't get nearly enough chance to go online and visit all the online forums. So I try and listen to as many of the podcasts as possible. Yeah. And I haven't heard anything other than casual dismissal of the particular card I have in my mind.
Wow.
Now, that's not to say that there aren't other cards that we probably should be a little bit more aware of,
Sure.
but again, this is what we're going to find out, because Lucas and I are just two people. And our playtesters, there's only so many of them, and there's only so many hours that they can devote to trying every single iteration of every particular card combination. So, it's events like this that are really going to let us know, where's the metagame? Have we missed something? Mm-hmm. But we think that for the most part, we have all the concepts dealt with. All the forms of damage have answers to them. There's also ways of protecting them as well as compensating after the fact. All the ways of getting hit with viruses. There's ways of dealing with that, in the game's core mechanics. There's also things that you can do to help mitigate that. The question is anybody recognizing this as a potential problem and then therefore building their deck to resolve it? Mm-hmm. I honestly think that what we're going to see here is a couple of very big trends and then a whole lot of mud, just muddied water.
Yeah.
I think that Worlds will be the point where the water gets clarified, where we get to see those trends crystallize and we get to see an actual metagame have developed because of what happens here. Not that this is going to necessarily tell us what the meta is. This event, I think, is going to define the meta.
Start the
We'll find
process.
out. Yeah, we'll find out.
Step one.
So, is the restricted list the method that you'll go to for Netrunner if it comes to that? Like, I know you've been using it in Thrones and other stuff, so is that what we can expect, or are you planning to do something completely different with this game?
I don't know. It's a good question.
We'll find out when it's broken.
Yes.
Wait for the
When
next episode.
when we come up with cards that absolutely requires to be handled, because right now there's nothing banned, nothing restricted, and no meaningful errata on cards. When we have something that pops up that is truly problematic, Lucas and I will sit down and we'll give some serious consideration to what are the best answers.
Nice.
We have talked about, other things that are potential ways of solving cards for this game that are specific to this game. Whether or not any of those will ever come to light, don't know.
Raise the influence cost? Just saying.
Just saying.
So I got one more for Netrunner. You got anything else for Netrunner?
You go ahead, and I might have one.
All right, so this is just from us being. This is probably the lamest question I'll get asked in this entire interview.
What's your favorite card?
No, it's like so. This card comes down the pipe from Creation and Control, Tyr's Hand, right?
Yes.
And it has this crazy text on it that none of us understand, where it says, "With the runner's about to break a subroutine, stop them from doing that, and then they can basically try to re-break it. It essentially shuts off clicks through HBI. This is the way that I'm understanding it. Mm-hmm. But that kind of language doesn't, as far as I can tell, fit into any kind of framework that's established for the game. So, as a designer, is this essentially kind of an exception to that framework, or is it not put the right way, or is it perfectly there and we're just missing it? Yeah.
I think the problem has to do with the concept of the timing. We have things very specifically set out in a run about here's where you can do paid abilities, and here's where you can do this, and here's where you can do that. Is Tyr's Hand a paid ability? Does it cost credits to trigger?
No, I don't think so.
It certainly doesn't cost clicks because
Yeah,
it's
no.
a corp card. So how do you handle something like Cyberfeeder? To, recurring credit. Use this credit for this thing.
Uh-huh.
Where does that fit into the timing chart?
It's kind of wherever you want. Whenever you're paying to break ice, it's ice.
It just is.
Yeah.
It just is. Same thing.
Wu Wei, man.
It just is. It's not that it has to be in a place. It tells you specifically
Right.
when somebody is going to break this subroutine.
I mean, have they
Do
paid
this.
for it? Like, have they paid to break it, and then have they not paid to break it, and then you stick them with it? Have they paid the cost, and then it's like, no, you didn't, and then now it's gone?
Now, you've paid the cost. It's just that essentially you've prevented them from breaking it. It's the same thing that, hey, I'm going to do a damage to you. I prevent that damage.
Yeah.
I don't get to reapply that. That damage is gone.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay a click to break that subroutine. I'm going to prevent that.
Yeah.
That click's gone.
Yeah. So, all right. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, I think because whenever I first read that, I was like, what does about to break mean? It's like,
Intent to clear.
it's like, hey, I'm going to break these subroutines, but I haven't paid my credits yet, but I've let you know that I'm going to break these. It's like, well, you are about to break these, so maybe I'll res this now.
About to break, like when the runner would do this,
Yeah.
it's always a case of the runner has stated intent, has done the process, it has yet to be resolved.
So usually means costs have been paid, effects have yet to be resolved.
Exactly.
And then tiers handled in that.
Yes.
Okay, solid. That's what I needed from you, Damon. All right, so let's talk about Thrones. Near and dear to all of our hearts, of course. I feel like the grandfather of the LCGs in a sense.
It is.
Is it the oldest?
It is the oldest LCG. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. Call of Cthulhu went to the Asylum Pack model first. The fixed amount of cards, you buy that and you get one of everything that has been produced and you're good to go. But it was not a living card game yet. That idea of I can go out and I can buy a core set box and it gives me everything I need to be able to sit down and play a game right from the get-go. And then I have this fixed model coming through where I buy this one thing and it gives me one of every card. And eventually we got to the point where it's, one a playset of every card.
Yeah.
That first entire idea of an LCG and the name, Thrones was the first.
Wow.
Thrones
Nice.
was the first.
Awesome. All right, good to know.
Our history lesson for today.
Here's the beautiful thing. So you guys did something that is controversial. I don't know if you knew that. I'm sure you did.
He's on the
But
forums.
it's essentially
I'm really not.
the restricted list and all that has taken a pretty what you would expect role for the longest time. It's like, well, these cards continue to be problematic, so they got restricted and then people moved on. But like the last 2 restricted lists ago, a giant bomb was dropped essentially, which a lot of people love, including ourselves. A lot of people don't like. And it was essentially, hey, everything that you're using to play this game right now that you love is gone. Play differently.
Yeah.
It was like, we're going
no
to
hyperbole involved in that statement
we're
at all.
restricted. Retaliation, anything that a Marshall
Refugees.
player wanted to play was gone. All your refugees that you put in your deck from day one, they're all gone.
See ya.
You can't play seasons anymore, or you're restricting seasons like.
Agendas, yeah.
And what that signaled to me was like, this is a precedent of like taking a very active role in shaping a game with a restricted list. So, do you agree that that is what you guys have more or less decided to do?
That
And-
was the idea from day one with the restricted list. It was
Nice.
always that way. The fact that we used it to break up combos is actually an extent, an extrapolation, if you will, from that idea of these cards are problematic for a reason. What that reason is, we never stated. Specifically that the restricted list would only do with cards that are problematic because of their power level. It was always that the cards that would go onto the restricted list are the ones that we find are problematic. If we go back to the first introductory email that Nate and I post that Nate and I had put together when we introduced the restricted list, it actually states that cards that are ubiquitous are eligible to be restricted. It's just that most of the stuff that had been put on there wasn't those cards. It was always a case of pushing and pulling and a little bit of a tweak here and a little bit of a guidance there for the players to help them have an experience where it was the richest and most balanced environment that we could help them create.
And so
getting rid of certain cards like, the refugees became necessary because you would have these decks that were capable of flopping out 5 to 7 cards reliably on that first turn.
Yeah.
And running, a deck that could only do 3 or 4 put you so far behind the 8 ball that everybody sort of had to keep going. I mean, I know this because that was how all my decks were designed from before this was still a CCG.
Yeah.
If I could not flop 5 cards, it was a useless deck to me. I would not play the deck. Of course, also when I was playing competitively, I also had the feeling that if you were smiling, I was doing it wrong and I was playing the wrong deck. Every encounter should be an NPE.
What's so funny? Yeah.
So
Why aren't you crying?
there's a reason why, as a designer, I only play fun, crazy, crafty decks. I no longer play competitively because that's no longer my role. My role is as an ambassador. Hey, good to see you. Let's sit down and talk. Let's talk about the game.
then I'm stealing all your gold.
Well, I have a question along those lines then, because I suppose when that errata came out, the refugees and all that stuff was gone, there was that divide in the community, and some people were for and some people were against, of course, but there was also a sense of a divide along the lines that this errata is unprecedented or not. We have never seen an errata quite like this within the game because it was not only extensive, but we never really had seen one where it seemed like the ubiquitous cards, and not necessarily the strong or whatever else cards, were being specifically targeted for that reason alone.
If you go back to some of the early restricted lists, you'll see some cards that don't make tons of sense that are on there. And people occasionally will talk about it. Well, this card shouldn't be on the restricted list. It's not that powerful. Or this card shouldn't be on the restricted list because it doesn't really combo with any of those cards.
Okay.
It was just that the player base had assumed that we made mistakes in judging the power level rather than assuming that we actually got rid of put those cards on the restricted list purely because they were utilitarian cards that you saw in every single deck of that type for that faction.
Yeah.
So what really the restricted list we put out 2 facts ago, what really made it stand out in our minds was let's take all the stuff that we've been talking about for the last year and a half. We've gathered all the data that we need, and let's go ahead and pull the trigger on it.
Nice.
And so these were all things that we've been looking at for, like I said, I think the least of them, other the ones that have been just released and suddenly we were like, whoa, hey, we discovered after the thing went to print, but before it got released that there was, some issues in it, so something might have only had 3 to 6 months out there. It's ended up on the list. Everything else, had been out for almost a year or longer. Yeah. And we have been talking about, what would the environment be like if we got rid of it. Theories is a great example. A bunch of the theories were restricted not because of their power level, but just because everybody did an automatic include.
Yeah, you would always run this.
So the question was, do I play my 5/7/2 now, or my 5/7/1 now, or do I play it on my second turn, knowing that you're going to play it on your first turn?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of the question.
Would you say then, if at all, that it was noteworthy, at least in its scope?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, to say that it was not noteworthy because of this one aspect, like getting you utilitarian cards, does not mean that it was not noteworthy for all the other reasons that you named.
Yeah.
And I agree with all of those other ones. It's just that we had always been using the restricted list in this way, but we only ever did it with, we'll put this card on.
Yeah.
We'll put these 2 cards on. Those 2 cards had no combo.
Right.
It's just that they were seen everywhere.
Cool.
Yeah. So that brings us to Long
Awesome.
Voyage, of course. Restricted list just got restricted or errated to neutral house only.
Yes.
A lot. I mean, you had. I don't know that I've seen a greater divide in the community between the Long Voyage is fine and this is just new decks that people haven't seen and aren't ready for and they just need to adapt versus getting 3 cards every turn with no condition attached, no way to turn it off. 85 cards doesn't matter. You run 3 of your uniques rather than 2 ofs, and you can find more than enough consistency in that deck. that it's just too good. Like a lot of people were saying, if I build a deck, there's no way, like very few decks don't get better if I just run Long Voyage instead of whatever it is that I'm doing with them. So I don't even want to say anything. I just want you to
opine.
I just want you to opine about the Long Voyage, would you?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of different directions I can go. We'll start with answering to that last sort of statement you made. I took what I feel were my best decks, and not my best days, social fun decks, I'm going to break something and I'm going to break somebody, like my competitive decks, and I put Long Voyage in and took out the agendas that they had been using. Not better. Actually, or at least one of them was significantly worse.
Yeah.
So I disagree personally with the idea that if you add TLV to a deck, no matter what deck it was, it makes it better. It doesn't. It makes certain things easier to deal with. You can get rid of some of your draw, and in place of some of that draw, you can instead add more awesome cards. Mm-hmm. Cool, groovy. Mm-hmm. But an agenda that is only giving you one additional card a turn is not necessarily stronger than an agenda that actually powers up a bunch of your cards. It makes them better. The difference between making the quality of the card that you have increased versus the consistency of your deck increased. Logically speaking, that latter one is not better than the first one. You could make an argument that you can create two decks of equal skill there. But I would say that if you can fine-tune a deck whose agenda makes the majority of the cards simply work better in and of themselves, you're going to have a stronger deck than one that just works more consistently with cards of varying quality. Sure. Right? So I have this deck here, which is all full of, it's a 3.5 average deck. It's all B pluses and A's. Maybe a couple of B's. And then I have this deck, which is a bunch of B's that all become A's, maybe A minuses.
Sure.
Consistently getting, really good cards is great. Haphazardly getting really great cards, but every deck in my card is great, or every card in my deck is great, is always going to be better. Mm-hmm. The question is, have I actually spent the time to make that be my deck? Versus finding a couple of really great cards and then finding a bunch of ways of making those cards be more consistent. And that's the thing. I mean, we sort of talked a little bit about this in our last interview, is the idea that if I am working on a deck that's based on 3 to 5 cards, I want those 3 to 5 cards and I want them in the right order as soon as I can. Because getting that is going to allow me to get my lock or my rush or whatever, and it's going to put you on your heels. Versus a deck that's just all synergy. Every card in it is good, and every time I can put an additional card in, it increases the efficiency of what I have out on the table by like a quarter or by 0.5. My deck just keeps getting better and better and better and better while you're still searching for your good cards. So where are you going to go? And then we're back to sort of the bandwagon idea. It's like, this deck, that Bruno played just totally won this meta and we completely disregarded it. But if Bruno found it and managed to make this deck be awesome and go pretty much undefeated, then there's got to be something there. Let's all turn to here. And then suddenly you're seeing this card everywhere. The Long Voyage. It starts winning this tournament, and then this regional, and this regional, and this regional, and this one. And then suddenly, but then you also take a look at how many people are playing that, and you're looking at who's playing it. If 50% of the field, let's not use hyperbole, 30 to 35% of the field is playing the Long Voyage, but of that 30 to 35% is 50 to 60% of your best players in that region. Of course it's going to win. I mean, that's just the way that statistics works. Right. It could have been like, hey, you know what? I know that summer was restricted, but because summer is restricted, nobody is running winter. Let's play summer. Because not only can I get consistent card draw now because nobody's playing winter, but I have all of these card effects that are getting ramped up because it's now summer. And like, if that was the deck that John Bruno had played, would we have seen suddenly a whole huge influx of summer, balanced immediately by a huge influx of winter, which would have caused parity again? Probably because we've seen that already in the past. That happened last year. That happened the year before last. Like, that's a cycle that we've seen.
Yeah.
The thing is that the Long Voyage enabled you to take a deck that was good from a combo oriented. I want to get 3 to 5 cards out because that's going to allow me to lock you down, or allow me to do my aggro, or allow me to do my rush. And I can get those cards faster, which lets me do my thing. Yeah. So, I mean, if the only reason that you had the agenda was because those 3 to 5 cards, when you did get them out, became better, then yeah, the Long Voyage is going to make that deck better every single time. Every single time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is the Long Voyage going to make a Knight's deck better? Yes, because the Knight's agenda really just gave you card draw.
Yeah.
You know, is the Long Voyage going to make a Summer deck better? Depends on the Summer deck, right? If it's bouncing Balerion back and forth, probably not. You know, Balerion being able to be cast again and again and again and again, and bouncing back to hand because it's Summer, and then all my other Summer effects, my ability to go and search for, you know, negative attachments that you're going to put on all of your characters, and being able to now stand every time an event card's being played. No, TLV is not going to make that deck better. TLV is going to make that deck worse, because now you must play, you know, without the addition, you know, you're getting that solid card draw, but now you're having these, you know, Black Ravens in there who serve one purpose and only one purpose.
Yeah.
And that's to turn on all these other effects.
I mean, I would.
So you're missing out on your Sam, which gives you burst draw rather than that single bit. And if you get it Summer, you get that single draw every single time. But every time you're playing a Ravens card, it gets you an additional 2 cards, which means you're draw capping just by doing what your deck wants to do anyway, without having to do anything else.
Yeah.
So, you know, where do you go with it?
I mean, I say TLV is interesting from what we saw, at least, is like, it wasn't about the combo. It was about giving decks that were really good up front, consistent, like persistence.
Yeah.
So, like, you saw Clansmen, you saw Dragons, you saw Greyjoy Cancel Fest actually happen for once.
But see,
like,
and that was what TLV was for. The idea is that I could take a deck that was tier 2, maybe tier 1.5.
Yeah.
And the problem was that because it was so thematically based, the mechanics were all synergistic, but I couldn't make them function well because I had to include a bunch of other stuff to get the draw that did not feed into the synergy.
Yeah.
I could now ignore those, and I could add all of the awesome cards that, you know, were Dothraki. I didn't have to go for just the best ones and leave out some of the others that were not the best because I had to replace them with draw effects.
Sure.
I could just put everything awesome that had the word Dothraki on it, and I had a deck that might be able to do something with the TLV. Mm-hmm. You know, but did TLV make the, you know, a burn deck better? Maybe. Depends. You know, is this burn deck going to be heavily influence based? If so, Knights of the Hollow Hill might be better. That 2 influence right off the top versus 1 card draw a turn off the top.
Yeah.
What is actually going to get you, you know, the greater efficiency through the 3 to 7 turns that a game is likely to play on?
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, my ability, if I'm ambushing cards in or burning cards from the pre-plot phase of the first turn, the influence in Knights of the Hollow Hill is going to be better.
Yeah.
I'm simply going to get more efficiency out of using that influence than drawing the extra card in hopes of getting influence. Right? So, and that's where the idea of taking the TLV and just adding it to a really good deck. And to me, you know, like I said, a really good deck is a tournament regional winning tier 1 deck.
Yeah.
Does TLV make that deck consistently better across the board? I don't personally believe so.
Yeah.
I believe it makes a lot of other decks that were always almost ready for prime time. And that's where, if you take a look at what TLV was being played with, I honestly think that this regional season was some of the most diverse decks we've ever seen in the entire history of the game. But what we saw a lot of was the TLV, because it was the engine that drove it. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like saying, hey, you know, we have a Chevy with a Hemi, we have a Ford with a Hemi. It's a Chevy and it's a Ford. It's a different kind of car entirely with a different engine, but it's got a Hemi in it.
Right.
And that Hemi is going to make it more efficient at being that Corvette, at being that Charger, at being that Avenger. You know, so same same deal. We had to do something with it because the perception was that TLV was winning all of these, regionals, and it was a problem when and therefore, there was so much sameness. When the reality is each deck was very different,
unique,
but they just used the same agenda to empower it. So we had to do something. And I didn't want to ban it because I didn't think it warranted banning.
Yeah.
And there's some really interesting things that can be done with the neutral faction. So
Yeah.
it was a little bit of a teaser, a little like, okay, all of you Shagas, here, do something with this.
Nice. Yeah, so you essentially answered my question there, but I was just going to ask, in case you wanted to add anything onto that, was whether there was some sort of difficulty on your end or everybody's end making that decision between, certainly there is this ubiquitous element within the meta now, but it is achieving the things that we wanted for it. We don't necessarily think that that's problematic, but the community
community does.
Yeah, in a large extent does.
Yeah, where does that leave you as a designer?
Yeah.
That's a tough spot to be in.
Okay, so when TLV was coming out, I fulfilled 3 general roles for FFG: designer, developer, and producer. 3 distinct different roles. Not infrequently at odds with each other as far as what your intent is, what your goal is, what your job is. As the designer, I hated doing anything to TLV. It fulfilled all of its design goals with flying colors. And it's my baby. The play testers, most of them dismissed it. 2 temps and a chump. Those chumps all dismissed it. Like, I hadn't listened to your guys' podcast about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're like, TLV, 85 cards? This is garbage. I'm never going to play this.
That was actually my initial
You would be
reaction.
surprised, yeah.
Initial reaction, I was very much in that bandwagon, but after a time, I was like, nah, I was thinking exactly what you're thinking. This is letting, specifically because I play Lannister, my Klansman deck had been, the apple of my eye for a long time. It's like, this is an atypical Lannister deck. It does things that Lannister generally would never dream of doing, and I wanted to play it for that reason, but for many of the reasons you probably know well, it's like it could never quite get there. But TLV fixed everything.
Yeah.
Everything. It was a beautiful, beautiful deck. But no more.
Let's pour one out for the Lannister.
Let's put one out. Let's put one out. Oh, you've done my designer heart proud. So the designer in me really disliked the idea of having to handle that. Really found it distasteful. That's the designer side. That's one little tiny bit of my brain. It's right here. This part. This is the designer part. The developer side is all about the balance, though. It's all about there's a problem. Doesn't matter if I think any individual card is a problem. The problem is there's a problem within the meta, right? If everybody feels a certain way, or everybody, if the vocal majority feels that there's a certain problem, it needs to be addressed in some level. That might mean putting out a card or 2 that specifically deals with that. It might mean a little bit of errata, it might mean restriction, it might mean banning. It might mean, talking to some of my playtesters and go, hey, has anybody taken a look at this deck? And then let them play with it and then tweak it and then start using it and then, watch them talk about it or talk to you guys and go, hey, so what do you think about this? How about this kind of deck? Have you guys tried that? Mm-hmm. And then you see it as a challenge. No, you know what? I haven't really thought about playing this card or that card or this style of deck. Let's just toss one together and see what happens. Yeah. And then you guys recognize that, hey, maybe there's something here. And then that starts a little bit of ripple. And if I did that over there and I did that over here, then maybe there's some change. But that's really sort of difficult thing. When I do that, it's not so much as to affect change as to act as a reality check on me.
Cool.
Right? Because again, I'm one person. Despite the fact that I designed a lot of the cards, does not mean that I'm always right.
You are infallible, are you not?
No. According to all of my ex-girlfriends, no. I'm my mom seems to side with them. So, him, her. So, asking if you guys have conceived of this or tried this against that kind of deck is really a case of, now when I did this is the results that I got. Maybe my TLV deck is not as good as your TLV deck. And my, Black Sails deck is better than your Black Sails deck. And that's why this matchup is showing me one thing.
Right.
And you guys are having a completely different problem. So if I can get a couple different groups to try that out, then I can get some feedback that's not just, in my own head and from my own games. And that actually is a reality check. If you guys report back like, oh my God, I never thought about this, then I'm like, yes. Okay, I'm good. I just need to weather the storm of public opinion.
Sure.
And, that happens. Sometimes it just comes around full circle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And other times, it just keeps getting hammered on until something gives. And I'm like, okay, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to make it so that GenCon is not about the Long Voyage. Because while Nate and I both have decks that can consistently beat our own Long Voyage decks, does not mean that 80% of the top 16 weren't going to be the Long Voyage decks here if that's what all the top players thought was the best. And a statistically significant number of other players thought the best deck had to have the Long Voyage. Right? And then now we're stuck between GenCon and Worlds having to do something, and everybody going, well, why didn't they do anything before GenCon? So,
yeah,
we did something before GenCon.
Yeah.
There you go.
Nice. All right, well, we'll get out of here, but I do have one last thing about the next cycle, which is super exciting. So the reason it's super exciting, we seem to see some revisiting of old themes, right? So we're starting to see some Bannermen, which is like, what? Bannerman? What is that? We see some other...
the Bannermen in this cycle.
We see the Kingsguard come around, and it's like all these old things.
Kingsguard was inspired.
I mean, the next thing you're going to tell me is like, yeah, you're going to build an awesome Night's Watch deck in 4 packs from now. And I'm just like, I would never have conceived of that, ever. But it's like...
Anything's possible.
Those things seem to keep... to come back around. Like, you're bolstering these old themes we already have support for, but just not enough. So is that a direction that you enjoy taking with this game?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it this way. You've just done something that you're really happy about and you really enjoyed the process. And you want to do it again.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, is that how much of your time do you devote to that again?
Yeah.
And then again and again and again and again. So what we've always done, and if you take a look at previous sets, you'll see this, is we'll introduce something. And in that set, we give you somewhere between just a nice solid taste. We're like, oh, that's really good. Can I have some more? Can I have some more, please? More?
Please, sir.
Can I have some more? And then oh my God, that was good. Whew.
Yeah.
That was filling. That was just what I needed. That really hit the spot. Well, the stuff that just hits the spot, we let lie for a little bit, right? You get 1, maybe 2 every once in a while. But the stuff that was just a taste, you get continual tastes. Like, Shadows cards, right? You had Shadow decks viable out of every house. Some were definitely better than others, but viable.
Did you say every house?
Every house.
Did you say House Greyjoy has a viable Shadow? We have 3 Shadows cards. 3!
Yes. It just doesn't work the way you expect it to. Here's the thing.
It's your fault.
We got an agenda to run all the things, so it doesn't actually matter, but... Yeah.
Well, but that's actually the idea, is that the other house's Shadow decks were primarily about, I'm going to take all of my own Shadow cards and then cherry pick Shadow cards from the other factions that are going to make my Shadows deck work really well. A lot of the Shadow decks are not too dissimilar from each other in that way.
Yeah. It's
just like, there's the Lannister Shadow deck, which has some Neil in it. There's the Barrow Shadow deck, which has some Rush in it. So on and so forth. What's the Greyjoy Shadow deck do?
We're not sure.
Greyjoy Shadow deck is not about the shadows. Greyjoy Shadow deck is about the regular Greyjoy mechanics, picking and choosing individual Shadow cards to make that better, rather than using the Greyjoy themes to support Shadow. use the Shadow themes to support Greyjoy. And so most people who were trying to make Greyjoy Shadow decks went about it in the exact opposite way of what we had intended.
Sure.
Now, there were a couple people that managed to make that work on a tier 2 level.
Yeah.
But most of those didn't even work there.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the Greyjoy Shadow deck, when done the way I just suggested, is tier 1. Well, it's like 1.8.
It can work. It can do something, yeah.
It's not quite a 2. It'll beat the 2s.
Nice.
It won't beat the 1s.
Nice.
But, again, that's also one of the things that we do. You have to remember is that as much as we like and gear the strategies of the game towards the competitive player, the game itself is always geared and created with the idea of the casual player. Because they outnumber us like 10, 15 to 1. Like crazy numbers.
Yeah.
Crazy numbers.
Yeah.
So it's always we're going to make sure that there's always fun decks for every house. And not every theme and every mechanic for every house is going to be tournament viable. They're not supposed to be. That was not why they were included. So sometimes you just got to go like, this is really fun. Clansman, really fun. Not intended to win GenCon, certainly not intended to win Worlds.
Right.
Based all on its own. Yet.
Unless you have TLV.
Hey!
Rob, you got anything on?
No, I'm good.
Damon, do you have anything that you would just want to say to
Parting
the fine
comments.
folks out there, either regarding Netrunner or Thrones or just Fantasy Flight in general?
Final Flight site rules! Yay! No, so I guess the one thing for Netrunner, sort of talked about the metagame.
Yeah.
One of the things that there was a lot of feedback on at various points from pretty much every direction was perceived imbalance between the runner and the corporation, and then between specific runners and the other runners, the specific corporations and other corporations. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the game was very new, and one side is easier to play than the other. If you're the runner, you know what you need to do. You need to run. It doesn't matter what cards you have in your hand. It doesn't matter what cards you have installed. Run. Run early, run often, but run. And if you do that, you can win games. And if you just keep pressing the corp in that fashion, you're going to end up with a very high win ratio when your deck starts performing to your extent. Corporation is much harder to play. You have to think ahead of time. Where do I think they're going to go? What do I think they're going to have? How much damage do I think they're willing to take before they jack out of something?
Right.
And so I have to try and guess what you're going to play and how you're going to play, and then preemptively ice the appropriate things. And then find some way of bluffing you to hit the places that are weak that I can't afford to res the ice, and hit the places where I can afford to res the ice and I'm going to hurt you the most. It takes a lot longer to learn how to play the corporation well. So we saw a lot of runner wins over a lot of corporations. Like just, bell curve. Hey, here's all the runner wins. Here's some corporation wins, and here's some corporation wins. Mm-hmm. That's balanced out a fair amount. Now what we tend to see, or actually we're seeing a lot less of now, finally, but that happened in the last 3 months, is a lot of Wayland and a lot of Haas-Bauroid wins. Not a lot of NBN, not a lot of Jinteki. And the reason why is because a lot of people were playing NBN and Jinteki were trying to play them like Haas-Bauroid and like Wayland, which is to say, where's all my in the run ice? How come I only have 1 or 2? I have to spend all my influence on bringing in the run ice into my faction. That's one way of doing it. That's not how those factions were intended to be played. That's not how they're designed, and that's not how their cards are meant to work, which is why you have a problem making them work that way. It's like NBN, big ice. Is that a thing?
I feel way better now.
Is that a thing?
I feel so good about
Because it's not really a
thing.
thing. So NBN's idea was always about taxing the runner. You want in? Come in. I don't mind. I'll even let you in. These 4 pieces of ice, oh, don't worry about that. None of them are in the run. Oh, and here's a tag. Here's 2 tags. Here's a tag. What, you're now 6 credits low? Excellent. Oh, this? Oh, sorry. Ghost Branch. 4 tags. Now my turn, and I lay this out, score it from hand because of all those tags you have, and lay this out, score it for hand, and I mean, that's how that is intended to play. You're not supposed to put out agendas until you get your runner tagged.
Yeah.
I get some tags on you, suddenly you're super scared. I'm getting rid of all your resources. You're wasting time with spinning off your credits and clicks to get rid of those tags. And every time you do that, that's extra counts that you're not running. If I can get you tagged once or twice, now I'm going to put an agenda and I'm going to score it before you have enough time to get enough money to run through because you've had to clear off tags and spend money.
Yeah.
1 click, 2 credits, fantastic, thank you. That's 1 free advancement for me.
Yeah.
Another click, another 2 credits, that's not 2 free advancement, that's 3 free advancement for me. Because you can no longer afford to beat my traces. One of which is going to do horrible things to you. And oh, hey, look, you ran an R&D, I'm not going to even res that. Oh, that's a scorched shirt that you saw? Oh, now you're going to spend the rest of the game clearing every single tag? Great, I'm never going to play that scorched shirt. I never intended. There's one in my entire deck. Score, score, score.
Yeah.
Just chain my breaking news, it's AstroScript pilot programs. Yay! Like, I mean, that's how NBN is intended to be played. Can you play it with a bunch of in-the-run ice? Yes. Is your win ratio going to be as high as if you played Hasbioid or Wayland in that same way? No. Of course not. Of course not.
So,
And it's the same thing with Jinteki. Jinteki is not about ending the run. It's about forcing you to spend... So, I spend 1 turn putting out with 1 click to lay down a card. That 1 card, when I res it, is going to do 3 net damage to you. You're now going to spend 3 clicks to recover that damage. I did over in 2 or 3 turns of collecting 1 click, or 1 credit, 1 credit, do some other stuff, 1 credit. Oh, you're going to run? So what I did in 2 or 3 turns, you now have to compensate in 1 entire turn.
Yeah.
So I get to span the work that I do, spread it out, and you have to do it all in one go. Because if you don't, hey, look, scorched shirt. Who knew?
Yeah.
Or neural EMP, 2 of them, and you're dead.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you did manage to score getting through. So my Jinteki ID hits you for 1, and then 2 neural EMP.
Yes.
So it's all about recognizing what a faction's color pie is, what it's supposed to do. And we try to tell you without telling you. Because where's the fun in that? It's like, hey, here's a puzzle, and here's the picture.
Yeah.
Here's the picture. As a matter of fact, not only is there a picture, they're numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's no fun.
Yeah,
There's no fun in that.
It took a while, but that has happened a lot. In certain, around our area, definitely.
Yeah, very much.
Like,
Great.
You see
great.
Jinteki and NBN, and it's like it's
Yeah.
a totally new. I mean, Tim.
Those
won
are
the
my favorites.
Tim,
Those
Tim
are
won
Lucas's
He won the
favorites.
regional with the Jinteki deck. I mean, it's like no one does that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so it's been cool.
I mean, it's logical. And would you say that it's kind of a failing on the community's part, the meta's part, albeit new, that we weren't able to see what's logical about the game? And just like with Game of Thrones, you wouldn't play a Greyjoy deck the same way you would play a Martell deck, because both those houses are trying to do completely different kinds of things, completely different modes of play, and the fact that people in the community are like, oh, let's play NBN Jinteki like you would these other 2 corporations.
I wouldn't call it a failing. I would say that there was not a lot of high-level analysis going on at first. Because, it's a new game. There's no high-level analysis. It's like, cards, pretty colors. Let's mix them together and play. And then you start doing, some, wow, this isn't working so well. Or like, hey, I've now played a bunch of games with just the core set with the shuffle and play. Let's do some deck building. And then you start going, well, what's the best icebreaker? What's the best piece of ice? And you start looking about, that's where you start doing the first layer of high-level analysis. What is going to be the most efficient way of doing this thing? The most credits that you can, or the most return on your credits spent for any particular card you're installing. That's where that first level of high analysis happens. And then later it starts to be, well, let's actually stop and take a look at all the cards that we have. Let's not look for other factions and what they can do, but what their answers are, and import those answers to us. Let's look at what we can do and what we do well. I see this trend. A bunch of tracing. What does tracing do? Well, tracing means that you have to spend a bunch of money. And it's going to constantly tempt you to spend the money to beat the trace rather than to run with icebreakers. And that's what I want as NBN. I don't want you to run with an icebreaker. The worst setup for me is facing off against Kate. And it's not because of her one link, which is what a lot of people think. For me.
Yeah.
It's because they will wait until they get their full breaker suite, and I don't want you to. I want you to run blind, beating my traces. Because look, trace 2, I invest nothing. You spent 2 credits. Trace 3, I spend 1 off of my ID. You're now doing 3. You know, it becomes that sort of thing where I'm forcing you to spend more money, turn after turn after turn, than it takes for me to res it or to continually invest in that trace. And so I'm slowly, taxing you. That's what I want. I'll toss it in the run in there because
Sometimes
I eventually want to be able to stop you.
Totally.
But there's at least half the time where I have an in the run ice. If I have 3 pieces of ice and 2 of them are traces, I won't even res the in the run ice.
Sure.
I don't want to let you see that until there is an agenda here I'm concerned about.
Right.
This is a 3-point agenda. Yes, I'm resing the in the run. If it's a 2-point or 1-point, I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe I'll res it, maybe I won't. It just depends on how much money do you have. If by resing this, do I get to make you, face check it? You've got no way of breaking it after you spend a bunch of credits? Great. If not, I'm gonna res the trace. I'm gonna res another trace. Here's 1 point. Congratulations. That 1 point cost you 6 credits. It cost me an action of installing. I haven't even advanced it because if I don't have it in the run, why bother? Especially if it's only a 1 or 2 point agenda.
Yeah. Which they frequently are.
Are we going to see a 4th runner faction?
That's a great question.
All right. So, Damon.
Oh, wait, I have another one. Game of Thrones. Will we ever see more deluxe expansions for each house?
That's also a great question. Great question.
Had to balance it out.
Damon, thank you so much, man.
My pleasure.
You're always
Thank
a
you so much.
fantastic interview. Lead to some really good insight about these games. We can always tell that your passion comes through really heavy for this stuff. So
I love the games.
Thank you for
I like
this.
to think of myself as a player first.
And thank you guys for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Got a little bit of insight from Damon, and hopefully our questions were acceptable to you. We'll catch you guys on other videos, but until then, take a break. I don't know, think about this. I'm still having to kind of digest,
I know, right?
the conversation. And we'll come back probably as better Netrunner and Thrones players. So see you guys next time.
Take care.